Can you hear us?
I can. Good morning, everybody. I can hear you
Good morning.
perfectly.
All kinds of
Welcome
computers.
to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. I'm here with our president, Ron, who is here as well. You can't see him, but he is here. Welcome to everyone who's on.
Oh,
You see the gallery view. So welcome to Flossie, Arlene, the hand that is next to Arlene, that may be attached to Ron, to Lou, Eva, Stuart, Karen, Jeff, Sheila, and Larry. I don't know if Jane's there. I don't know if Paul's there, but welcome to everybody on YouTube. We know we have a really nice YouTube presence. We were going to talk about who wrote the Bible, over the theories as to who wrote it. Welcome to Noel. But today, because of what's going on, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the state of Israel and the territories, stressing that, and then go over some of the issues that we're facing today. As you know, it's a very stressful time. We had a beautiful, we just lost Noel. Noel, if you're listening on YouTube, try and get back on. We just lost you. We had a beautiful rally yesterday, rally vigil, in which we had a really large number of people, considering we only had about, less than 24 hours to gather everybody. And we really didn't get to publicize it to the non-Jewish community. So we had some non-Jews there. We had some Israelis. So we had the mayor there who helped organize it. We had rabbis and members of all four congregations and the federation, clergy. Obviously, if we'd done it today, it would be probably twice as many people. So I don't want people to think that our Christian brethren weren't there. It's mostly because they didn't know about it. But if they had, they would have been there. And so, but we also know that when Israel goes into Gaza in the coming days, that the world press will probably not be so supportive of Israel anymore, even with what we're seeing. So we have to be ready for that type of retaliation. We're already seeing it online. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about just the history of Israel in terms of the territories, so that people know that as well. It's also, I'm going to be teaching my 8th to 10th graders about this on Sunday. It was a scheduled talk anyway, but I'm moving it up to this week. So I'll use a little bit of these old maps that I use. They're really terrible. I can hear you. Good morning, everybody. I can hear you perfectly.
all kinds of
Welcome to, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to put some of the maps up just so people will know. And then if you want any of the information, I'll send it to you. The maps you can get online, which are much better than the ones I have on this thing, but I'll show you. I also have an outline of some of the history of it. But let's go over, just basically go over a little bit of the history, and then we'll go over to today, what's going on. So before the modern era, Jews had always looked to Israel theologically. It's our homeland, but nobody was really thinking of moving there. First of all, it was far away, and second of all, there really wasn't much going on in Israel. It wasn't called Israel; it was called Palestine or whatever other, depending on what time period, it was called different things. But there were Jews living there, but it was almost uninhabited. For those of you who've been to Jerusalem, let me take this down for a second so I can put this on a one-person share. For those of you, how many of you have been to Jerusalem? Back then, and we're talking in the 19th century, Jerusalem was basically the old city that we see today. That was all of Jerusalem, the old city, and it wasn't very nice. It was disgusting. There was trash everywhere. As we mentioned last week, if you see the wall today and how beautiful that area is, the wall was a little section. The dirt was all the way much higher. There were houses all the way. There was like a little corridor to go to the wall. And there wasn't very much going on in Israel. It was really a nothing piece of property. The 19th century, we had the creation of first farming communities that failed, Jews coming from Eastern Europe. And then, of course, Theodor Herzl began the idea of Zionism at the end of the 19th century. And that started to take hold as Jews moved to Israel. And you can see this map here on the right. By the 1930s, if you see the dark, do you see all the dark area? that is area that Jews bought from the Turkish Empire, from the Ottomans. So when Jews started going back, they got funding obviously from the Rothschilds. And in the early 20th century, they started building kibbutzes. They started buying areas. They created new cities like Tel Aviv. Of course, Petah Tikva was the first one. They started creating kibbutzim with the idea that sometime we might be able to have a country or something there. And then, of course, there were a lot of issues. Now, we have to remember the Muslim Israel issues or Muslim Jewish issues we see that most people think are going back since the foundation of Islam, 1500 years ago. The truth is Jews and Muslims got on very well for most of the period of Islam. So in other words, until the 19th century, and even during the 19th century, you'd rather live in a Muslim country than a Christian country if you were Jewish. The Muslims created a format called Dhimmi. I never pronounce it right. It is second-class citizens. Jews were at the top of the list. It sounds bad, but it's great. In other words, as we were higher in the esteem of Muslims than anybody but another Muslim, which was a very forward-thinking way of looking at the world. And Jews took advantage of it. We did very well in Spain. We did very well in Babylon. The Muslims were not, fighting us when we started moving to Israel in not droves, in the 19th and early 20th century. It wasn't really till right before or during World War I where you started to have the Mufti of Jerusalem, this vehemently anti-Semitic guy, start to be really promoting this idea of hating Jews. And then when Jews started getting property, and really after World War I, when Jews started saying we wanted to have land in our own country, that's where it started to get violent. So really, the anti-Jewish belief in the Muslim world is only about 100 years old, which sounds like a long time, but it's not compared to 1,500 years. So, and for a lot of the time, when we remember, Israel was a tiny place. There was not very many people living here. So after the after the UN partition plan in 1947, if you see this on the left, the dark areas were given to the Jews. The light area with the lines were given to what is now called the Palestinians. Does everybody see that right over here? Mm-hmm. So you see that it looks like the Jews were giving bigger piece of property, but we also remember that in 1947, there was nobody living in the desert. I mean, the desert was completely empty except for Beersheba, really. So really, we got this spot here. Why did we get this area here? Let me get to sharing thing. There we go. Okay, got it. Why did we get this area here, which seems like the prime real estate? Because we bought it, remember? We showed the list before.
Let's do this. Hang on. Let's do this.
They can watch the recording.
Here, clear drawing. Okay, so if you go up here,
It'll propagate.
if you go up here, we bought all this land. Does everybody see it? This is the land we bought. So when the mandate came out, it was basically the land we bought plus the desert, which nobody wanted. So, and the main area of the country at that time was this beautiful hill area around Jerusalem and Jericho. Gaza has not been what it is today, but it was much better than it is today, but it still wasn't considered prime real estate for the Muslims, but it was still on the coast. So 1947, the UN decrees the partition plan, as we know, May 14th of the next year, Ben-Gurion declares a country. Israel goes to war with 7 countries. Everyone in the world, if anybody on this was living at the time, thought that the Jews were going to be massacred because 7 countries plus the Palestinians. But that did not happen. Now, the Jews won the war, created their country as we know. So what happened to the Palestinians? This is what they weren't called Palestinians at the time, but they're now called Palestinians. What happened to them? There are, on the Palestinian side, they will say the Jews drove all the Palestinians into Gaza and the West Bank. And the diehard right-wing Jews will say the Muslim countries told the Palestinians, leave your homes because there's going to be a war, and then you can have your home when you come back. It's probably somewhere in the middle. Probably more of them left because they wanted to escape war and because they were assured by the Jordanians, Egyptians, and Syrians and everybody else they would get to go back and they would have their own country. This, of course, was never going to happen. The Muslim countries wanted to divvy it up for themselves, so it was never going to be a Palestinian country. What ended up happening is what we call the Palestinians today, or the territories, were started really during and after the war. And you can see it right here.
Lower it.
Right here.
Oh, it's here. You're right.
And right here. The Jordanians put the Palestinians that were living in Israel into this area. It was part of Jordan. Jordan is what we call majority Palestinian, so they didn't want really any more of them coming in. The Egyptians put them right here. So you can see that this is now part of Egypt. That's why there's no border there. And this is part of Jordan. And this is what it was from after the war until 1967. So we did not put them into the places they are. They were not treated very well. They're basically just thrown in there and left again. Why did you not hear about the protest from the people living in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip until 1967? Very simple. If you protested against Jordan and Egypt, what did Jordan and Egypt do?
Oh, they kill you.
They kill you. It was very simple. We'll kill everybody. It's very simple. That's why they didn't protest. So now what happens is, we all know, in 1967, Israel wins a war. And as opposed to what had happened in 56 during the Sinai campaign, they decide they're not giving the land back. Basically what happens usually is the UN allows the war to go on, and as soon as Israel looks like it's winning, they stop it. And they force the Israelis to give back land. But in so this is the 56 campaign right here, where we went into Egypt. By England and France asked us to go in and take the Suez Canal. So Israel went in because they didn't have very many friends. Israel takes the Suez Canal basically, and America says, no, you can't do that. So Israel goes back. Then we have the 6-Day War. And that is in, obviously, 1967. And you see 1967, we take and we keep the territories. We keep the West Bank. It's called the West Bank because it's west of Jordan, not because it's west of Israel. We keep the Golan Heights.
Oh, okay.
And we keep, most famously, the Sinai, which we know is a lot bigger. I'll redo this. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my computer. It likes to go do this. There we go. Come on. All right, sorry about that.
Rabbi, question for you.
Sure.
So even dating back, if you go back to one of the first initial partition plan, the 47 plan of the United Nations, Gaza was never part of the of Israel, of new Israel, but it was it was part of the plan to give the Arabs their own state.
Yes, well, not necessarily their state, their own area.
Their own area.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was, you're right. The partition plan was, yeah. The idea was to give them, so this is what Israel ended up taking in the, right down here, 67 war. And they said, we're just keeping it. We'll keep the West Bank as a buffer between us and Jordan. We'll keep the Sinai as a buffer between Egypt. And we'll keep the Golan as a buffer between us and Syria.
But I guess my question is then, it was even originally anticipated in 47 in the partition plan that the Arabs would have two separate areas, the West Bank, so to speak, and also Gaza. And that was
Exactly.
going to be eventually the Arab state. That was what the UN had offered at the time. So there was
Exactly.
always a two-state solution in mind. Was that the UN plan?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. Now, obviously, who was going to take control? If they had agreed to do this, what probably would have happened is Jordan would have gone in here and taken this. Egypt would have taken Gaza, and if and Lebanon would have taken this northern part of some of it is Lebanon would have taken this part. So I doubt the Palestinians would have gotten their own country anyway at this time. We're not. So then Israel now has the West Bank, the Sinai. And so what do? Let's get to this.
Oops, it's upside
Give up
down.
the
Yeah,
Sinai.
I have the maps terribly on here. In 19, what? All right, I finished with those maps. Okay. In late 1970s, Israel, of course.
Rabbi, we lost the maps.
Yeah, I turned them off. I have no
Okay.
more.
Okay.
In 1978, 79, of course, Israel makes peace with Egypt and gives back the Sinai. What does Israel get? Egypt gets the Sinai, which is way bigger than all of Israel, and they get billions of dollars every year from America. And what did Israel get?
Peace treaty.
They got a peace treaty. They got nothing else. They got a peace treaty, which was way more valuable to Israel. So since that time, Israel has been in control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Israel felt wrongly that if they just treated the people better there, most of the West Bank people worked in Israel for a long time, that they would be happy and be fine, but obviously they didn't want that. Well, I don't blame them. You'd rather have your own country. So in the 1980s, they started protesting with rocks, and Israel obviously had trouble figuring out what to deal with the situation. Once the people started protesting on their own, that is when Arafat came in and kind of took over control. And obviously there were peace treaty opportunities. Israel gave some very good options. Obviously, Rabin's assassination did put a thorn in that a bit. But of course, Yasser Arafat never really wanted peace, proved it time and again. He stole the money. Basically, after he died, the Palestinian Authority was negotiating with his wife for all the money, billions of dollars. And of course, she said no. And he spent billions of dollars basically paying off people, buying military. So once he died, it became a little bit more fractured. You had Hamas and the Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, kind of at odds with each other, as they still are today. Hamas ended up being more and more in the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So eventually, obviously, Israel gave the Gaza Strip back to the Palestinians. And that was what they hoped would be, that's what the UN wanted, the world wanted. And Israel was hoping that it would be the time that, there was going to be at least some semblance of peace. We're going to give you the Gaza Strip. And, there's factories there, there's gardens, you can create jobs. So this was 1993, right? I can't remember when it was. Do you remember 1993, I think. So Israel gives them, and as soon as Israel's leaving, all of a sudden the Hamas attacks them. And then once Israel leaves, of course, they destroy all of the factories. At this time, it's really Palestinian Authority is really more in control. They destroy yes, Stuart.
Rabbi, given that we had already at that point that Gesh had the Camp David Accords, that is more or less of a peace with Egypt, had there ever been a proposal to turn the Gaza over to Egyptian control?
That's a good question. In 1979, when they were doing the peace treaty with Egypt, one of the main points that Egypt was firm on was that Israel would keep Gaza and the Palestinians would stay there. So Egypt absolutely said, no, we don't want the Gaza Strip. We don't want the Palestinians coming in. That was one of the, Israel would have been happy, I'm sure, to let the Palestinians leave, maybe even give Egypt some control over Gaza. But that was absolutely a no. So thank you. That's a good question. I should have mentioned that. So in 1993, the Palestinian Authority is now in control, destroys factories, destroys gardens. Again, if you read the literature that kids study, it's really anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. But of course, then eventually what happens is there are peace negotiations that break down. Arafat then immediately starts a second intifada. Whereas you and I, when peace treaty negotiations go sour or not, what do? We go back to the table. But in this world, they decide to create intifada. We all remember it all started when Ariel Sharon went to the Temple Mount. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That is a myth. That's not when it started. Sharon actually asked the Palestinian Authority, is it okay for me to do this? They said yes. And 2 months later, there was an intifada. They're blaming Sharon, who had done it months earlier, but they made it sound like he had just done it against their will. So again, it was just they were gonna do it no matter what. Israel completely disengages from Gaza in 2005, removing all of their settlers. And this is when they destroy even more factories. And this is when everything goes crazy.
Who is they destroyed factories?
First, the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not Israel. That was,
No. Israel left them there for them.
okay.
Yeah.
So when Israel left Gaza, the UN and the European Union promised that Hamas and Palestinian Authority would create peace, would recognize Israel, and of course that never happened. And the UN, of course, backed out of that deal and completely went against Israel again. The same thing happened when Israel left Lebanon. And it's basically like, yes, we'll do this for you. And then as soon as Israel leaves, they start talking about how terrible Israel is. So does everybody remember the Arab Spring?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is important for this area as well. But it's pre that. Before that, they had votes as to who was going to be in control of Gaza and the Palestinian Authority. Now, what is a democracy? Is a democracy voting for your leaders? The answer is no. A democracy is voting for your leaders, and then when you vote again, your leaders leave willingly after they've lost. So that's a democracy. We voted for George Washington. If George Washington said, I'm going to stay in power after my 4-year term, you can call me president, but in reality, he's king. That's not a democracy. A democracy is we vote somebody out and they leave on their own. That's a democracy. So when you have a vote in this area, it's not a democracy until you have another vote. So there's a vote. Hamas did really well, obviously, because there were, when you vote, generally the radicals who have been doing all of these things already have a union as it is. And the people, so when they voted, a lot of people voted for Hamas because they had at least given food to the people, and the Palestinian Authority was a corrupt. So they basically split the vote in Gaza. And so they were going to have the Gaza controlled by Hamas, the Palestinian Authority. What happened next? Hamas went in killed all of the leaders of the Palestinian Authority and took over. And that was the last time there was a vote. That was 17 years ago. So that is not a democracy. So Hamas takes over for good, and the Palestinian Authority now is in control of the West Bank. So that is where we are today. Since that time, Hamas has always been anti-Israel. Their platform is destroy Israel. Karen.
I just wanted, I was doing a little research yesterday. There's a whole social welfare part of Hamas that I think is what draws the people to them. It's that the militant wing is only as I say, a wing of it.
Well, that was
Isn't that-
really more true at that part of the time. In 2006,
Okay.
when the Palestinian Authority wasn't feeding the people enough, they were giving out
Okay.
books and food
Right.
to get, and once they got the votes, that's probably, now they're the government. They're not now
Right.
the rebels. So they're in control. So they,
Right.
as we know, they if you go on to, what does Hamas believe? What is their goal? Is their goal to create a Muslim state in Gaza? The answer is no. That's not what they do. Their ideology is to destroy Israel. That's the ideology, period. It's not to make life better for the people. It's long term. We're going to keep, our people will suffer long term. It may take us 100 years or 200 years, but we're going to destroy Israel. Sorry, Ron, can you hear enough?
What?
Can you hear? Okay, good. So that is Hamas. That's who Israel is dealing with today. In the West Bank, obviously, the Palestinian Authority has been much better compared to Hamas, but they are not organized, and their people are equally anti-Israel, although not as violent. Now, you may ask, why has Hamas not done what they did to Israel this past week before? And the answer is very simple, because they weren't able to. So when the world is surprised that Hamas was so violent, the answer is the only reason they haven't been is because they've been stopped. Israel has kept them contained. They've only gotten a few people through at times. So, and people are asking, why haven't they been shooting rockets at Israel in this number? Well, the answer is they have been shooting rockets at Israel the whole time. They always shoot rockets at Israel. It's just the world only cares if Israel retaliates. And the world's like, well, they're shooting rockets. Israel has Iron Dome. It's okay. Yes, because I'm sure in America, we would be fine if Mexico is shooting rockets at us all the time. And we're like, it's okay, Mexico's shooting rockets at us, but we have Iron Dome, and most of the rockets are hitting in the middle of nowhere. What would America say to that? What would a European country say to that? We know, but it's Israel, so it's okay. The reason is because they didn't shoot this many rockets so accurately with this many people intruding. This was a very big buildup, most likely sponsored by Iran. I don't think they found the smoking gun that proves it's Iran, but everybody knows it's Iran. And so the only reason the atrocities didn't happen before is because they couldn't do it. Yes, Karen.
Well, I was going to say, there's been some speculation, and I've seen it on the news, and it crossed my mind. Israel's been so focused on this thing with Bibi, with the judicial system, that maybe that, and also with all the protests, that maybe they took their eye off, and they've been focusing rather on the West Bank as well. They took their eye off Gaza, is what I wonder if that's what's going to.
That's certainly be, I mean, again, I am not, an expert in this area. This is going to be something that is going to, Bibi, usually if you're a prime minister where something like this happens, you're ousted. Bibi, though, has a very different cabinet with the ultra-Orthodox that want him in power no matter what. The person he put as defense minister is a super radical guy who probably was not supposed to, so. But we'll see what happens after this is all over. Obviously, when this happens, Israel's not going to start overtly placing blame until this war is over. Larry.
Yeah, just two other factors that you may mention them, and I walked in and out, was one, the peace treaty with Jordan, obviously that was an important step as well because, it was, got back Jerusalem and the Holy City and stuff. And also the fact that Jordan kicked a lot of the Arafat and out of Jordan into the occupied territory, so to speak. But just to follow up on Karen's point, one of the other factors that people have mentioned very often is the Abraham Accords, and now the possibility that not only were some of the United Arab Emirates, but now Saudi Arabia was starting to talk. That together with, the dissatisfaction of Netanyahu's government and, there's no precipitating event here. There's no Pearl Harbor here, so to speak. But all of these are little factors that, not little factors, but large factors. And Iran getting very, very concerned, as well as, a lot of the other countries there that if Saudi Arabia joins it, then they've got two coalitions. The thing that just crossed the news, I'm watching the news as I'm watching you here, and it just crossed the headline. It says that now Israel is forming a government with Benny Gantz.
They're not forming a government. They're forming a military government.
Military, okay.
Yeah, this is not in the government. This is just the military thing. Yeah, it's not. So the power will still be with Bibi Netanyahu. We'll see what happens. Yes, Stuart, and then somebody, and then
Yeah.
Flossie and Stuart, and then Jeff.
With all of the other actors, except Hamas and possibly Hezbollah, we don't have an identified leader. When we're dealing with the Palestinian Authority, you heard Arafat. When we're dealing with Saudi Arabia, you hear the young prince,
The Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Ben
bin
Salman.
Salman.
And every place seems to have some identified center. Here was a highly, highly coordinated event by Hamas, and there doesn't seem to be a leader or a leadership that's identified. It didn't grow from grassroots.
Yeah, I mean, again, there is a leader of Hamas, Marzouk. Yeah, so, but you're right. They have to be they're a little bit more careful about these things because they know Israel will target anybody who's, so they're a bit more careful. But yeah, they're not a country though. So that's also why Hamas does not want to be a country. They want to be.
Nor was Palestinian Authority though.
The Palestinian Authority has taken on that role now but that was not the original. The original idea was we're going to overthrow Israel. That's why Palestinian Authority and Hamas were created. Now the Palestinian Authority is in charge, and so is Hamas. There's that belief that once a radical group takes over a country, they will start to become administrators. That is not always the case, and certainly has been a little bit more so with the West Bank, but very little in Gaza. Flossie.
When you're talking about when they did this and what, with them thinking about doing it, a point that they have brought out that it is the 50th anniversary since the Yom Kippur War.
Oh yeah.
It also was our holiday again. So they very much, when they planned the time that first, with it being a holiday and the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. So they knew exactly when. I mean, I wasn't privy to their planning, but here they're stressing the 50th anniversary.
Right. And who knows exactly who was planning? I mean, was the leader surprised? Was this another group? There's reports that Iran was surprised a little bit about what was happening. Obviously, they've been funding them. But these are all good questions. Somebody else had something to say. Was it Jeff? Okay. So these are all good points. In the 90s, we made peace with Jordan. It was a stronger peace than with Egypt. But we all know what's happened in recent years. America kind of took a little step back from being in the Middle East, although we did send warships to the U.S. fleet recently, which is great to keep Iran out of it. But what happened was you saw two things happen. America kind of stepped a little bit away from the Middle East, and America took out Saddam Hussein. And that has profoundly changed the dynamics of the Middle East for better and for worse. So we all know Iran and Iraq, were at each other's necks for years. They had a vicious 10-year war longer in the 80s. But once you took out Saddam Hussein, the check on the Ayatollah disappeared. And Iran started to take over parts of all of these areas: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Started to fund more places like Hamas. They were already funding Hezbollah, parts of the Arab Peninsula. And so Saudi Arabia, which is the leader of the Arab world, is certainly of the Sunni, because they got very nervous that Iran was going to attack them. So did Jordan and Egypt. Not only attack, but send terrorists into their countries. And so Egypt and Jordan already have peace treaties with Israel. Egypt, during the Arab Spring, of course, they voted for radicals and the army had to kick them out, thank goodness. The peace with Egypt had always been a little weak with Israel, not like going to war, but they weren't buddies. But that peace between Israel and Egypt has now been cemented much more in a stronger way. The peace with Jordan, the same. Now, not necessarily with all the people, but with the governments, because they fear Iran. And if you're a Sunni, what is considered a lefty Sunni country, which of course left to us is very different, then you are on Iran's radar. And of course, Saudi Arabia is the leader of that world. And Saudi Arabia does not have a big military because they're protected by the US. And so they got very nervous because the US is not in the Middle East as much. And so Saudi Arabia, which had always had underground ties with Israel, started to mention Israel publicly. We are talking with Israel. We're doing business deals with you. This, of course, started with the United Arab Emirates, but really Saudi Arabia is the main player. And so this changes the dynamics of the Middle East for the better for Israel, but it's also for the worse because Iran is that much stronger. So now we see the Palestinians don't really play any part in the larger picture. The Palestinians were always used as pawns in the Arab world. We hate Israel because of what they're doing to the Palestinians. That doesn't mean we're going to help the Palestinians. That just means we're going to blame Israel for atrocities. Now, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and the allies of Saudi Arabia want Israel's support. So they are not accusing Israel of all these things all the time, which has put the Palestinians in a very bad position because they had negotiating power for years and they didn't use it. And then you had more right-wing governments come into Israel, and now that Saudi Arabia doesn't support them in this way anymore, they don't have any negotiating power at all. So the Palestinians are in a really terrible political position because Israel does not want to make peace with them because they've not proven that they can do it. And Israel is not being encouraged to make peace with them by anybody Israel cares about. Iran, of course, hates Israel, but Iran's going to hate Israel no matter what. Israel doesn't care what the radicals say. Israel doesn't care what Europe says because they weren't supportive of Israel anyway. Israel cares what America says. And Israel cares what Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt say, and they're saying we don't care about the Palestinians, just protect us against Iran and be supportive. So right now the Palestinians are in a bad position, which is one of the reasons this happened. It is very much a part of their own doing, but some of it is Israel's doing as well. Israel could have done a lot better job in many ways through the years, but that is all beyond, so there is no peace negotiations at all. Period. It just doesn't exist. Flossie.
Why so violent? I mean, this is a war against civilians almost. the way they've
Right.
gone into home with it, and it's more violent than you can ever imagine. Was it so built up that it was ready to erupt?
No, it's always been this violence. I mean, they've always been this violent. They just never got 1,500 people into Israel. That's the reason it became. No, I mean, they had suicide bombers. They were attacking. They were doing all these things. But if you're a lone suicide bomber, you're not going to somebody's home to kill them because you're killing two people or a family, which is terrible. They've done that before. You go to a mall. You go to a major place and detonate your bomb. They got a lot of people through. You know, it's basically they got past the border and they're free to do what they want. This is what they would have done all the time. This is not anything. I mean, again, it's not that they didn't want to do it before. They just never had the opportunity. And Israel let their guard down. And Israel always said, if they got some people through, this would happen. And it's exactly what happened. So Eva and then Larry. And Eva, you're on mute. Okay, then Larry, sorry about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention two things. There was an excellent interview this morning with Tom Friedman on MSNBC. And, he obviously offered, some insights into what might happen and with the U.S. moving their ships in, and if Hezbollah opens a second front up in the Lebanon area. And but it's really worth seeing if you can catch it either on there or from streaming.
Yeah, he's again.
But it's a terrific interview. I think it's very thought provoking.
Where was it on, Larry?
I saw it on MSNBC.
MSN. Okay, so I think that's a good one. Well, he is I don't always agree with his attitude toward Israel, but he's very knowledgeable. Yeah, I mean, America putting the fleet there was not for the Israel's and Palestinian situation, or probably not even for Israel and Hezbollah. It was for Iran. That's what it's for. Israel can take care of God. I mean, this was a terrible thing in Israel, but this is not a war Israel's going to lose in terms of the Hamas taking over Israel. I mean, that would be a very big surprise, if that happened, or Hezbollah. Israel's going to go in kind, and there's going to be a lot of destruction in Gaza. Unfortunately, innocents are going to be killed. Israel does more of a job of trying to prevent that than anybody else who attacks. But obviously, Hamas will be shooting from civilians so they can have mass casualty to get to the news. So the idea of America is there to stop Iran. That's the only reason we're there.
Two other things I wanted
or maybe Russia as well.
Yeah, two other things I wanted to mention is there have been reports, and of course there'll be so many, postmortems now of what happened and things, but apparently it took something like 4 or 5 hours for the Israeli troops to get down to the kibbutz areas and the Gaza Strip there, and apparently most of the troops were either not deployed or deployed up the settlements borders to protect the settlements. So there's been that kind of a criticism of, the overemphasis obviously on the settlements and some of the statements that have been made by the members of Netanyahu's government about, making sure that they move all the Arabs out of the settlements. So that seems to be, another factor, obviously, in the preparedness. Maybe the Hezbollah, not Hezbollah, Hamas knew about that kind of thing.
And I think there's going to be, heads are going to roll, people are going to get fired and all these. This is the biggest military mistake in Israel since the Yom Kippur War in terms. Ron.
You mentioned the armed forces of the United States being close to Iran, being stationed there. But unless it's a real deep, dark secret, I haven't heard much about what our administration wants to do to get our American people back.
Well, anybody who wants to leave now, they're evacuating. Anybody who wants to leave is being evacuated.
I'm talking about the hostages, actually.
Oh, that is probably not, we're probably not going to hear that. I don't think they want that announced.
Right.
That's going to be under the table. Attacking Gaza, everybody knows that's going to happen, but they're not saying exactly when and how they're going to do it. And they're certainly not going to tell us how they're planning to try and save these hostages. That would be, you're right, Ron, but hopefully they are. I don't have high hopes. I mean, again, I don't know what's going on, but taking hostages back is probably very difficult. Karen, then Larry.
Larry,
Well,
had-
well,
so Larry
one
Oh,
was-
sorry.
more.
Let me finish with Ron. Sorry, Ron.
One more, I think that I read on the internet this morning that a lot of the hostages are being used as human shields.
Oh, yeah, all of them will be.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to discuss what they're doing to the hostages or what they did to people because the atrocities are and again, what they found today, even, they're just finding things. So we're not going to speak about that. But obviously, the hostages will be used as human shields. That's definitely. Again, what they've done has been, but again, it's nothing new. I mean, they did these things before, just not in this. I mean, just didn't have the opportunity to do it people in the know are not surprised what they did, just surprised that they got in and were able to do it. That's a surprise. Flossie, then, and Stuart, I think.
Why is the world, I mean, we're Jews and we're upset and saying what we can do in our little ways. Why is the UN and other countries not protesting what's happening?
Well, the UN is the most anti-Semitic organization in the world. I mean, you just have to see how they treated Israel through the years.
Yes.
So you're not going to get any support from the UN. That's, you'll get support from America. You're not going to get support from Europe. It's a part anti-Semitism and part that the Palestinians have been very good at getting the narrative. And there's a couple reasons. One, if you want access to the Palestinians or Hamas, you can only show what they want you to show. So if I want to go into Gaza and have a news story, I can only say what the Hamas wants me to say, or else they won't give me access. They're not going to kill me. They'll just say, nope, I don't want you there. Same thing with the Palestinian Authority. If you want access to the West Bank, you only can say what they want you to say. If you want access to Israel, you can say whatever you want, as long as you're not, committing treason. So it's a free country, and that makes Israel at a disadvantage. So Israel lost the narrative a long time ago. So it's a mix of anti-Semitism, a mix of there were a lot of Arab countries in the UN, so they can vote on things, and a mix of Israel for a long time didn't care what the world said. They just said, we're going to do whatever we want, and they never really did the media thing, and they got into it really late. And they're also a very tiny country. I mean, so it's very hard. So they are going to be labeled that as soon as people get over the atrocities that happen, they're going to be very upset at Israel for going into Gaza. They killed 1,200 of you. You should only kill 1,200 Hamas people and no civilians. Not realizing that that's not how it works. If America's attacked and they kill 3 or 4 Americans, are we going to make sure to only kill 3 or 4 people? No. I mean, in that part of the world, if you show weakness, which Israel has just shown unintentionally, you have to show strength. So if they don't go in and really do what they need to do, it's just going to embolden Hezbollah, Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and anybody else. So it's a precarious situation being a democracy in that area. So you have to understand they have to think in a way that we do not think. Now, before I get to Larry and Karen, we still have to feel really bad for the Palestinian people, because most of them are just regular folk. They just want to live their lives. And yes, they may hate Israel because of all the propaganda, because they live in difficult times. But if you gave them factories and jobs and money, and then they would probably be fine. It's just, this is not who's in charge. Karen, then Larry.
Well, all right. I have 2 things. First of all, kind of in answer to Flossie's question about what are people, why isn't Europe involved? I was talking to my sister yesterday, I guess. She was obviously brought up Jewish, but has not been a practicing Jew. I'm not even sure she considers herself a Jew. Her husband's not Jewish, and they've been Unitarians for many, many years.
Give me a call. I can change that.
But yeah, well, I want her to come. Yeah, I've invited her. So I was talking to her about, I said, are you following the news? Have you been watching TV? She said, well, no, not really. I read some stuff online. So when I was talking about, aren't you concerned about Israel? She said, well, there's violence on both sides. They're both guilty. And so I mean, if this is my sister who has an identity, hopefully, family history of Judaism, and she's feeling like there are lots of people out there who are not paying attention. So I just wanted to throw that in. The second thing,
Yeah.
and this is kind of to the side, but I wanted a clarification. We've been watching CNN a lot, and several Israelis or Israeli journalists have compared. They're saying, well, we got, people out of Entebbe. When was that, in the 70s?
76,
But they were all in one place, weren't
Yeah.
they? And this is a whole different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a whole different thing. It's also a different mentality. The Hamas knows Israel's capabilities.
Yeah.
And they know Israel's coming for them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, hopefully they'll be able to save the hostages, but we'll see if that's even, I mean, again, it's a different situation. But again, you're hopeful because Israel's done some amazing things in the past, and their military, per capita is as good as anybody's, as good as America. Well, America is by far the best, but Israel's, for its size, is better than anybody its size. So, but this is guerrilla warfare, and it's a difficult prospect. So I don't know. I'm not an expert enough to know what are the chances. Larry?
Yeah, the Israeli ambassador was on TV a couple of times, and he made a couple of interesting points. And one of them is that this is really, the hostage situation is a world situation. They didn't discriminate between whether or not they were Italian visitors, or whether they were Jewish, or whether or not they were Americans or anything.
Right.
They were taken prisoners. And I think Biden has done a sensational job in, keeping the coalition together and getting statements, at least from the major governments, and even countries like Italy, which are, not always, pro-democratic in places. But at any rate, I think that's one thing. The second thing that he mentioned, and I do see a substantial change in watching MSNBC, I'm kind of addicted to it the past couple of days, is that many of the times what they were showing was destruction in Gaza by the Israelis. The airplanes dropping bombs and the missiles and things of that nature. And now he pleaded with them to make it more even-handed, and we're seeing a lot more stories, at least in MSNBC, I don't know what Fox News is covering, of these individual events as these horrors of the massacres at the kibbutz, and the massacre at the concert and things of that nature. And I, for one, have written to places thanking them for their continued coverage of these horrible stories. I mean, they're not showing anything graphic there, but they're, incidents of people talking on the telephone to people who are in the kibbutz, and showing some of the remnants of some of the kibbutz. And they're doing that a lot more now than just showing the side by side of the Israeli attacks there. So I think that's going to happen. The alarming thing that's going to happen in the next couple of days is, with Israel closing off the oil supplies and the water supplies and electricity and so forth, you're going to see a large number of calls for help for the people of Gaza. And I think that's something, now getting back to Flossie's comment, the thing that alarms me so much is statements that come out of Harvard and my old school, CUNY, and things of that
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah,
Freedom of speech is
Yeah.
permitted, and obviously, but it just seems like the student organizations, are getting involved now, and I think that's something that also we have to be very, very aware of.
Yeah, and again, we're also in America, so we're getting a little bit better of an objective opinion. But it's, what is Europe saying? What is Russia saying? What's the media in China and the rest of the world saying? So you'll get a little bit, yeah. And again, here, the Palestinians are the poor innocents that are suffering at the hands of the vicious Israelis. So again, it's a really, I'm sure, people have studied this. How can so many people be supportive? They go and rape and kill and mutilate, and people say and justify it. Well, the Israelis did this. And it's really interesting that people can justify these things any way they want. And since Israel's always the bad guy, and they don't want to change their mind, and they don't want to be wrong, they'll say this, and they'll go to the, well, Israel deserved it. Well, this is only a few of them. They don't see the people in the streets screaming and taking people and and cheering them on, in Israel. And somebody was telling me, the other day that Israel's done some terrible, people have done some terrible things. Israelis have killed and raped and maimed. And I said, yeah. And they go to court and often go to jail if they're caught. Wherein this is a case where the government wants you to do this, wants you to make it as horrific as possible.
Just following up on that comment, and have you heard anything from HUC or any places that talk about enhancing? I know we have security at the synagogue and around other Jewish installations, and that,
Oh yeah, everybody is working with the city.
more information recently as a result of that, or we
You
doing
mean
it?
in our country or in Israel?
No, here.
Yeah, everybody is working with the police, the government to try and shore up everything, because we know once Israel goes into Gaza, and their goal now is undoubtedly going to be to completely remove Hamas, which is not going to be easy because there's a lot of places to hide and there's a lot of shields they're going to use. And so this is going to be a long war. And so, the opinion of Israel, which has got the sympathy today, that is not going to last very long, unfortunately. People will forget the atrocities and blame Israel again. There's a lot of issues. Israel's done a lot of things they shouldn't do, but again, they've been persecuted more than any country in the world. You may compare it to South Africa in the 80s, but Israel has been, the whipping boy of the world media for a long time. The good news about Israel is Israel does not care what the world says. They're going to Gaza, and if the whole world said don't do it, Israel would say we're doing it. America, which has always been a supporter of Israel, but has also been very supportive of a peace process, has been very supportive. I think President Biden said, you got to do what you got to do, which was, and he sent the fleet over there, which has been really good because obviously our president and Benjamin and Netanyahu do not get along real well, and they have been at odds with each other, not enemies, but at odds. Flossie.
Well, two quick things. One, if you have friends or family in Israel, it's very important for you to communicate with them and let them know you're there. It's easy to say, but just a call, just letting them know you're thinking. I know from our dear friends, it meant so much. Second of all, Israel now more than ever needs money for everything.
That's
And
right.
no matter what your cause is, send money whatever way you want. They need it, and they need it quickly and desperately.
That's a great point. And we're sending out we're sending out today 2 places that you can send money to. One is through the federations, one is a medical organization. I'm going to get Stuart and then Ron wanted to say something.
Yeah, I had a fairly big surprise on a broadcast yesterday. They had an Israeli who had been in charge of the part of intelligence that was involved with recovering hostages and whatnot.
Mhm.
He was talking about that issue, but the thing that he said that surprised me is clearly there's been a very close relationship between Mossad and American intelligence, which is not a surprise. But what did surprise me is apparently there has been an equally or almost as close relationship with both German intelligence and French intelligence. So I think there is a sort of a more hidden connection that's supportive of Israel in Europe than most of us anticipate.
Yeah, we hope so. We expect that, the governments and the people, but, they all know they work together. The Western intelligence agents have to work together because they need each other. And there's also been, even between Israel and Saudi Arabia before, even before they started overtly speaking with each other, there was intelligence shared, about what was going on with Iran and that kind of stuff. That's an excellent point. So we'll see. I'm going to get to Ron in a second. I'm going to move this so that to this Ron over here.
The other Ron.
The other Ron, Mr. President.
Rabbi,
Oh.
comment on how you think the preceding political problems that Israel's having.
We can't hear you, Ron.
Okay. He was asking about the political problems in Israel and how that's going to happen. Obviously, it's impossible to know how that's going to affect it. Once things settle down and we get to the political usual stuff, blaming, there's going to be repercussions. Now Netanyahu is a better politician than anybody in world history. He's been, ahead of a democracy longer than anybody ever, I believe. Is a master. Plus, he has, the right-wing government with the ultra-Orthodox are really focused on a lot of other things. So usually you would say that this is assured that Netanyahu will be voted out soon after this is over. That is hard to tell. What they would need is they would need somebody from the government, one of the parties, to leave, and the 64 they have would have to go to 60 or less. Then the president would say we have another election. If that were to happen, the other side probably would win. They realize their mistakes from the last election, but you have to have a party that's going to leave. And I don't know if that's going to happen with Netanyahu. They're very happy having total control, even with a mistake like this. Now, there is, a small chance that he will be ousted. If he is ousted, it doesn't affect the political landscape in terms of who's in control of the government. Likud has so many, Likud has 20 something people in the Knesset. So they have a list. Every party has a list, 1 through 1,000, whatever. And if you get 17 seats in the government, the 17 top people on your list are in the government. So obviously, Netanyahu is number 1 for Likud. So if he's ousted, it doesn't change anything in terms of it's just everybody goes up. That means the person who was 24 is now 23, and that person's in the government. The number 2 person is number 1. They may be a renegotiation of who's prime minister from the other parties, but it won't change who's in control of the government. So who knows what's going to happen there? Obviously, Golda Meir lost her seat eventually after the Yom Kippur War. But they're going to have to figure out who's to blame and what really happened. This is a serious breach of security. So I don't know. Some people say because they're not paying attention or they're looking other places. That could all be true. But I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert, and they'll probably have to figure this out. I assure you they will figure this out, who's to blame, and somebody's going to be blaming, and then that person will be blaming somebody else. So that's just how it works. But hopefully they'll figure it out so this doesn't happen again. But again, everybody's been brought up. They're going to be at war, so there's going to be we'll just hope that Hezbollah doesn't attack and Iran doesn't do anything or Russia doesn't do anything. Russia is loving this because Russia wants the world to stop paying attention to Ukraine. So they're very happy that this is going on. Ron.
Yeah, we have a very active Hadassah group here in Hilton Head and Bluffton, and we're also making donations for Israel through Hadassah.
Yeah, Hadassah is another great. That one may be sent out as well. Hadassah is a great organization for this.
They have a crisis fund.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So those would be 3. The 2, I think Hadassah Crisis Fund will put on ours as well. We got to do that. Thanks for reminding me. Flossie.
Thank you, Rabbi, for taking an amazing situation and trying to bring it down that we could understand it. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's like Karen says, we got to pray that the loss of life for the Palestinians is as minimal as possible. For the ones that aren't part of this, pray that we don't find any more Israelis who have suffered, and pray for the country because this is a big hit for the country, and pray especially for all the families who lost loved ones or right now I think the death toll is 1,200 and 2,500 injured, or maybe more, but obviously they're still finding. That's a lot of people. It's a very tiny country. I think the equivalent is like 40 or 50,000 people in America. Larry, we'll finish with you.
Yeah, Jane is at a Hadassah meeting right now.
Okay.
And I had suggested to Joan Schwartz, who's the president, that they watch whatever you have right now on YouTube. So I'll be sending them the link so that they could, Hadassah members could all watch.
Okay. And I'm not an expert. I'm seeing the same news as everybody else. So we're just doing our best to understand what's going on. but it is going to be, I mean, we all assume the world media turn against Israel. America's always a little bit better, though. Remember, what we're seeing is not what the rest of the world is seeing. They watch their own media. They watch American TV shows, but when it comes to the news, they watch more of their own. So what is the BBC? I mean, we all know what Al Jazeera is saying, which is exactly what you assume it will say.
Is Israel planning any new follow-up events based on, the rally yesterday or with other congregations?
We'll be talking with it. We'll see, we're trying to gather support. Again, what was important is we did it yesterday. We probably had several hundred people, easily several hundred people.
You've covered a little bit on the local station.
Yeah, but we didn't have we didn't have protests, protests of our vigil. And if we did that more, that would probably inevitably happen. You'd have, and we don't want to get into. So it's a debate as to if we'll do it privately, and we wanted to do something outside, visible, not in a synagogue or the JCCJA, if possible. We talked with the security expert. We talked to the city. They had a lot of police officers. They had their police tank there, so they made it very safe for us. But obviously, you can't do that at everything. So. But we'll still be doing things. But sending money is probably the best thing. But as we hear more, we'll know more and more what's needed. Certainly writing your state reps and especially your
TV stations,
your TV stations, but also your Congress people, your senators. I mean, that's some of your mayors. That's important because you got to ensure that America stands strong because. It's easy to stand strong 3 days later or 4 days, but in a month, that's going to be an issue. Ron?
Rabbi, I know you keep in touch with the other churches and the Muslim these churches. What is their take on this?
Well, I mean, we organized everything yesterday. All the churches talk ministers have been very supportive. I had a couple there. I did not send a note out to all the ministers. I was like, I don't know if I want to send out a note and invite them to come today. It kind of seems weird to say but I had several ministers friends of mine who came, and everybody's very supportive. I think Savannah, I'm not as sure about Bluffton, but the Savannah area and the other surrounding areas are very supportive of Israel and Jews. And so it's a little different feeling than I think a lot of other places. So the support of Israel is going to be very strong here no matter what. And so that's really nice, but other places are not the case. I mean, this is just the case here for whatever reason. So the idea is to be vocal, to be supportive. Don't get into fights though. Don't put yourself in danger. You say things on the media, you say what you can, but be careful but I think make sure your Congress people and your senators and your local reps and states all know what you're thinking.
Yeah, Tom Davis is going to be here in Sun City in a couple of days or so, I think. I'm not sure when in the pavilion. So
yeah. I apologize. Is that your congressperson? Your
state senator.
State senator. Yeah, our congressperson he was not able to come yesterday. Obviously, it was a day notice, but he would have been there if he could have. But Buddy Carter's our congressperson, always been very supportive of Israel, and so is our mayor, and so that's been great.
Right. Good.
Well, thanks, guys. I know we went a lot longer.
you.
We will meet
No,
next
thank
week.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was terrific.
Yeah,
No,
if we
it's
don't
such a good
do some.
thing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, if we don't do something similar next week, we'll go back and do who wrote the Bible and a discussion of that. But if we need to do some updates, we'll do that instead.
I have a quick question, Rabbi.
Yes,
Can
Karen,
you
what's up?
send out, can you email us the maps, that whole thing you had?
Yeah, I can email mine. I mean, they're kind of old. It's
I
probably
know,
better to
but
go
I
online,
would-
but I'll send it. Also, I'll send
would
there's
be
a
really helpful.
timeline. There's a timeline I'll send.
Yeah, I noticed that. Great, thank you.
All right, and these are old stuff. I just use it because it's
I know.
accessible.
It's helpful.
Yeah,
It's
but there's some,
helpful.
yeah. All right, guys, thank you very much. I love your background, Karen and Stuart, by the way.
Oh, I did.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Friedman interview. Watch the Tom Friedman interview if you
Yeah,
can get.
that's a great idea. Larry, why don't you send out that link if you don't mind?
I don't know if I have a link, but it's.
I can find it. I'll find it in some
I
way.
just tried to look it up and I couldn't find it.
Find it. If
I
it
saw
just
it live.
happened,
Friedman
oh,
was
you couldn't
also-
find it?
Friedman was also interviewed on CNN yesterday. It was a good
Or the day
interview.
before, I think.
Yeah.
And
might
I
be
think it's
similar.
it's important to see views from the left and right and see,
Tapper.
you know, so we get all these different opinions because people are not necessarily as supportive or more critical of Israel, but not anti-Semitic. It's good to see their opinion as well. You know, the anti-Semitic people, you know what they're going to say, but there are people who are legitimately critical of Israel, and see what they say. I think that's Tom Friedman would be one of them.
No, can I just add one quick thing? We've been watching CNN, as I mentioned. They have a lot of their key anchors, Wolf Blitzer, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, the ones in the morning. There's a number of them who are Jewish, and you can see as they're discussing this how personal it is for them.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see the emotion in their faces, and there's an awful lot of Jews anchoring
Yeah.
CNN.
I mean, it's what we always feared would happen, you know. A
Don't
bunch
be
of them
afraid
get
of
in
them.
and they create havoc. I mean, it was the assumption that this would happen if they ever got past the borders. That was
Keep
what
the
everybody always
atrocities.
assumed, and that's exactly what happened. Larry, sorry.
Then keep the atrocity stories coming.
Yeah, I hope we don't hear any more.
Show
of it.
that it's a, you know, that this is well and above. This is terrorism. This is not militancy.
This is not freedom
Yeah.
fighters. Lou?
I talked to a friend in Israel this was on Sunday, and he said they don't get the news in Israel the way we do. They weren't getting the pictures and all of the atrocities there. Now, maybe that's changed since Sunday
It's
But-
definitely changed since Sunday.
Yeah, they didn't
in
have.
Israel,
Well, you have to remember, they attacked on Sukkot and Shabbat, and they had to probably keep things under the wraps because they didn't want the terrorists to know what they knew. So you had to be a little bit more careful probably there. The
maybe.
terrorists pay attention to Israeli news. So that's but by now they're probably they all know what's going on, I assume.
CNN's been showing a lot
I
of
mean,
real
actually
atrocities.
seeing the pictures and all of that.
Yeah, I try not to watch. So terrible.
It's
I mean, but again,
heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
this is what, you know, it's the fear was not that they would that they would get past it, and that this is what was assumed would happen if they ever got through. And it's exactly what happened, exactly what everybody said would happen, that these people are, you know, maniacs. They're not freedom fighters. And that's it's a whole different level. But, you know, our prayers continue to be with Israel and the people there. And again, we'll keep up to date. We're going to send out another note today with, again, the places. I'll see about getting the Hadassah. What was that fund called again? Crisis fund?
Crisis fund or something?
Yeah. What was it, Karen? Or who said
Oh,
it?
Larry said it.
Ron said it, I think.
Ron,
The crisis
that-
fund?
The Crisis Fund? Is
Oh,
that the
maybe.
name of it? I'll look it up. We'll put that as a third one down.
Okay,
All right. Thanks, guys. All our best and stay safe.
Thanks.
thank you.